Hello and welcome to the Mahindra Transport Excellence Award Series 2012 on ET Now, a series of panel discussion that looks at the opportunities and challenges faced by the transportation sector in India. I'm Siddharth Sharma, and over the next half an hour, with this panel discussion will focus on the emerging industries and their impact on the transport space. And to do that, we have eminent panelists over here with us in our studio. So let me start by introducing them. On my extreme right is Vineet Agarwal, Joint MD, TCI, Sachin Bhanushali, Deputy Chief Executive, Gateway Rail Freight Limited, Rubal Jain, Director, Corporate Strategy, Safexpress Private Limited, and Manish R. Sharma, Executive Director, Capital Projects and Infrastructure, PwC India. Welcome all on this show. But before we start this panel discussion, we have Nalin Mehta, CEO and MD of Mahindra Navistar, joining us from Pune as an expert on this topic of emerging industries and their impact on the transportation space in India. Nalin.
Siddharth, first of all, the transport sector is very deeply linked with the economic growth of the country. In fact, if you produce, you have good GDP growth, you have to have more trucks on the road. So all this opening up of foreign direct investment should certainly give a flip to our growth plans. So first of all, I think it will do give us a good growth in the transport sector. Specifically, the sunrise sectors which seem to be very, very promising. Retail is one of them. Retail has many downsides, upsides in the transport industry. One of the things that retail does is to create a lot of demand for cold chain. The consumption patterns are going up even in smaller cities, and the demand for fresh produce is increasing day by day. So transport industry has a lot of improvement to be done in this area. The other sector that really helps us is the construction and ports, as well as the international trade. Very deeply linked to the transport industry, especially tippers as well as cargo. And I believe that foreign direct investment in these areas will bring in a sea change in how our industry looks like.
Thanks, Nalin, for joining us. So, gentlemen, let's start this discussion. What are the opportunities and trends in key customer areas such as steel, cement, automotive, cold chain, and even retail? Vineet, if we can start with you.
All the industries have a direct correlation to GDP growth. And as we can see, though GDP growth might have slowed down this year, but all of these industries will correlatedly grow as fast as GDP, if not faster. So, for example, the auto sector is growing at much stronger pace than the other industries. So, we would see a lot of traction there, we would see a lot of demand coming in, and the need for transportation will be always needed.
I think the trends of globalization have resulted into a lot of international practices being brought into India in the dry bulk as well as liquid bulk space. One of the problems that the road transportation segment in India faces is that it is largely an unorganized sector. So getting them to come under a single cover for providing an IT-enabled, track and trace-enabled service is going to be slightly difficult. But I think things are moving in the right direction on that front as well.
But Manish, we see a lot of companies have that IT-enabled system in place.
The large fleet operators have already got their Petro cards as well as the GPS, GPRS enabled track and trace facilities. The problem is when the arbitrage business, the brokerage business brings in vehicles from the unorganized market to provide services for a larger player. That's where I think some amount of integration will take place over a period of time. The ownership pattern, I think, will still continue to be that of a single person owning one or two trucks. The parcel size also has started increasing. There was a time when 9 tonners used to play a very important role. Now there is a shift towards 16 tonners. There is a shift towards closed-bodied trucks. There is also a great shift towards intermodal transportation, wherein the first mile and the last mile is taken care of in containerized form, whereas from hub to hub, the movement is done by way of rail transportation.
All right, Rubal, your thoughts on...
So I think given that manufacturing is becoming more and more efficient and competitive, and the customer is very price sensitive, so he's going to buy at the cheapest price available. The real margin that companies are now going to see is going to come from supply chain efficiency. and trucking transportation and all sorts of transportation is a part of that. But I think it bodes well for this industry as a whole.
Manish, your thoughts?
So let's look at the problem in perspective. Clearly, you are seeing certain trends emerging. GDP growing, doubling in next 10 years. Crude steel production quadrupling in the next by 2030. Retail, which is today around 5%, organized retail, which is around 5%, growing to around 25% in the next 10 years. All of these will create a huge amount of demand for road and last mile logistics. Clearly, the message for the sector is that you need to move away from the fragmented small base to large service offerings, superior trucks, okay, integration with other modes of transport. So there are a whole host of issues which need to be addressed, right from the way the industry is organized, to the way the legislation is enabling it, to the way the infrastructure is going to keep pace with it.
All right, as Manish pointed out, a lot of clusters have to come together and work it out. So Sachin, can the current practices and the performance levels of the Indian transport sector, support their requirements, the customer requirements right now? Because many of these customers are very global in outlook.
There are two steps involved in this. First is you become compliant and then you also integrate it. As far as the compliance part of it is concerned, I think most of the large fleet owners as well as intermodal service providers like us have started moving in the direction of being compliant on the ecological norms, on the track and trace norms, on IT enabled tagging of all the cargo which is carried in the trucks as well as containers. The integration part of it, I think, still lags behind. We don't have the legislations as well as the rules which are required for this. Large trucks wherein the axle load is much higher as compared to the axle load at which we operate today is neither being manufactured locally nor the homologation trials are being conducted for that. So there is some distance as far as reaching that level is concerned.
To add to that point is that I think a lot of the fleet operators and companies now need to move to a corporatization structure. So when we move to a structure which is compliant, which is corporatized, automatically the needs for in a globalized environment, in a globalized scenario will be met. Of course, these are some of the points. Clearly, the infrastructure has to support that as well.
Okay, but coming to organized and unorganized sector, even the customers are mainly from the unorganized sector in India. But what do you think are the expectations of these customers?
The customer has moved to a very great extent to organized sector. Okay. In fact, the demand pattern which has emerged is not only organized on industry basis, it is organized even on geographical basis. So we have clusterization of certain industries in certain pockets. You have automobile in North India in Gurgaon, you have Pune cluster, you have the South India cluster which is coming up, you also have the new Gujarat cluster which is developing. And so it will be possible to create specialized infrastructure for transportation needs of such industrial clusters which are coming in. The unorganized sector will have to become organized if it has to improve. I think that is the key mantra there.
So Rubal, how do transporters cater to the logistical requirements of these customers?
One, they have to think more long term. You don't think long term and you want returns very quickly. And the kind of infrastructure they have to invest in, good warehouses, good material handling equipment are expensive. They don't just come cheap and they're not available readily across the country. Technology is something that people have to invest in from scratch here because, again, these are products that are not available off the shelf. I think additionally, talent is another thing that we need to invest in. Okay. Because that's something we've been missing. This industry is typically not attracted talent.
Do you agree with Sachin and Vineet that when they say that an unorganized sector like this has to become organized?
I think you need to understand the point because why is the industry unorganized? 75% of the industry is 1 to 5 truck fleet owners. Easy availability of finance. Okay. That makes it easier for people to go for a couple of trucks buying and start operating on a route and then start servicing somebody on an outsourced basis. But at the same time, I think the other important point is about the way the transition is being demanded. Today, most of the industries have their logistics function in-house. What do they outsource? They outsource transportation. They outsource to some degree warehousing. But the rest of the functions they still tend to do in-house. They don't trust the capability of the industry. You need capabilities across the chain. It's not only transport, it is also warehousing, it is also ability to do documentation, freight forwarding, and these are the kind of capabilities that the industry will be demanding going forward. And I think the most important driver of this change is going to be the buyer of the services themselves.
All right, but Vineet, tell us, the present fleet of vehicles that are available to all the transporters and logistical companies here in India. Do you think they are, capable enough to cater to the needs of the clients and, the logistic companies as well?
No, it's a combination. I think, globally, if you see, there are companies that do provide certain amount of applications that is custom from the factory. And there are some specialized operators and companies that make these applications.
So Manish, how do you think all these logistic companies can come together or come to a solution that makes them one-stop shop for logistical requirements to all the customers that are present in India right now?
Our unorganized players today are offering their trucks on a sourcing basis to intermediaries who provide it to customers. There has been concepts of a fleet exchange being propounded. But fleet exchange requires information to be provided to it. These kind of unorganized players cannot provide information to the fleet exchange, which gives visibility. We need to look at it that unorganized players will ultimately need to look at consolidation, and they have to move away in terms of the service offering. The service offering can no longer be just transport. It has to move from being beyond transport.
That's where I sort of disagree. I think what would change is when customers start demanding a different type of transportation contract. So if they start insisting that I'm going to work with only 10 players, and let all the other smaller guys be associated with these 10 guys. That's how consolidation will happen. That's how we will lead to a better structure.
All right, with that thought, it's time for a very short break on the Mahindra Transport Excellence Award Series 2012 on ET Now. But don't go anywhere because this discussion continues on the other side. Welcome back. You're watching the Mahindra Transport Excellence Award Series 2012 on ET Now, a series of panel discussion that looks at the opportunities and challenges faced by the transportation sector in India. So, the discussion continues. And Manish, what is the impact of global 3PL and 4PL players on the Indian transport industry from both service provider and the customer viewpoints?
On the back of certain developments within the country, the 3PL, 4PL play is picking up. What are those developments? The announcement of retail. That's where you require skills. That's where you require somebody to take ownership. But they are not going to come and set up a complete shop. What we'll see is a lot of acquisition of capacities from within India as they build the entire supply chain. I think that from a customer's perspective, especially from a retail perspective, it's very important because the kind of skills required for doing the entire delivery system, managing the entire distribution delivery system for retail, you require a very high degree of capability of the individuals who are employed in that trade, as well as the kind of facilities that they deploy. On its own, the domestic market had not evolved to a maturity, but with retail, that maturity will be placed into the market, which will demand that more and more skills are brought in, whether grown within the setup or whether borrowed from outside, either by way of acquisition, alliance, or etc.
All right, Vineet, what do you think, the current logistical requirements, do they support the growing needs and ever-growing needs of, the growing retail sector and the MNCs that are coming up in India?
I think the way that we should look at retail is not necessarily from the retailer's perspective always. I think we have to also look at it, how the suppliers are going to change. How is their supply chain going to change? Today, if there is an FMCG company that is supplying from the FMCG company's factory to a CNF, to a wholesaler, to a distributor, and finally to a retailer, he's actually going to break that chain for an organized retail company. He'll go from the factory to the CNF and perhaps to the distribution center of the retailer and then finally to the store. So when that starts happening, we will see a major shift in supply chain. So I think a lot of companies are not yet prepared to handle that, and that too not just from the logistics perspective, provider's perspective, but also from the company's perspectives. The retail costs are so high, rental costs are so high, that you can actually not store anything in the shop. You will have to make daily deliveries. You have to perhaps make deliveries 3 times a day. Okay. So these kind of impact in terms of the overall supply chain will be far-reaching.
Perishable items that are being transported, a lot of people are coming up with, a lot of logistic companies are coming up with cold storage options. Still, there are instances when, the goods arrive damaged or, non-consumable. So what do you think, the blame lies with the logistics part of it, and how does even the
There will
insurance?
always be an element of damaged or pilferage goods, or at least the container being damaged, the packaging being damaged. So there is always a mechanism of spare stock of the packages being maintained at the warehousing location. It is a very common practice across the world. The insurance companies are yet to get into, I think, ability to handle this. Okay. Most of the time insurance companies, the insurance claims land into trouble.
In fact, there is no insurance available for open marine.
Okay.
For transportation companies cannot get insurance for cargo transportation.
Okay.
Only the companies can, the owners of the produce of the goods can only insure it. So there's clearly a an issue which is needs to be addressed.
Rubal, how have multiple state taxes, driven logistics and transportation companies to adopt a hub and spoke model?
I think that's all that has driven the entire network design of India. The network design and the routing and the hub and the location of hubs is not based, at least as of now, not based on something that's efficient or that is closest to the consumer, closest to the supplier, but it is completely based on which state has what tax regime, where is the octroi, where is entry tax valid, and it's caused a lot of wastage in the system. Okay. Because you're sending something from Delhi to Lucknow for billing locally before it can move back to Ghaziabad. And but it has to be done because that's how the state taxation structure forces people to set up shops across the country. And that's something that I think we're looking forward to the GST to solve, because the moment that comes in, and you hope that permits and forms get out and they're done away with, that there'll be a much more efficient transportation that actually comes into play.
Okay, Rubal, you were talking about the GST policy. Let me ask Manish, how do implementation of these policies like GST is going to help the trucking industry in India?
Today, the way the entire warehousing infrastructure is distributed is dependent upon which state has less taxes, which state has where I can facilitate entry tax, etc. Once the GST comes in, then these smaller warehouses or godowns, glorified godowns, they'll disappear. What we'll see is large number of large warehouses located at distinct locations from where they can supply large industrial consuming or distributing towns. Now, as this happens, you'll probably also see a lot of intermodal movement, and that's where players like Sachin's company will become important, because they will do the long distance haulage, and the last mile movement from the node will happen mostly through trucks. So we'll see a lot of interplay happening between the trucking companies and the rail movement, and that's where we'll see some dramatic change happening, because it is going to be more efficient, it's going to be much more cleaner, and it's also going to result into a kind of alliance building between the truckers and the rail service providers, which will see which has going to a lot of manifestations for the market.
With that thought, it's time for another short break on the Mahindra Transport Excellence Award Series 2012 on ET Now. But don't go anywhere, because this discussion continues on the other side. Welcome back. You're watching the Mahindra Transport Excellence Award Series 2012 on ET Now, a series of panel discussion that aims to look at opportunities and challenges faced by the transport sector in India. So, as the discussion was going on, my next question is to Manish. Tell us, the National Highway Authority of India has been awarding projects consistently, but at the same time, the present state of the roads is very dismal. So, what do you think, the government is trying to do to improve this infrastructure problem? This is like the backbone of the trucking industry.
Yeah, so if you look at the NHAI program, what has happened is that the golden quadrilateral at least has been connected. The northwest, east, north, south, east, west corridors have been more or less been built. So they have been gearing up. They have been changing a lot over the last few years. And if I recall correctly, while they missed the target, they did pretty well in a few months in the year. Having said that, I think the state highways have to now catch up, because the distribution will not happen through the NHAI and the national highways alone. The states will now need to take up the task of linking their network with the national highways. Some of the states are already doing it: Punjab, Karnataka, Gujarat. Okay, these are states which have already done a decent job of rolling out programs where they want to build state highway network to plug into the national highway network.
Now, we did a study with IIM Calcutta where we found out the average speed of a truck in India in 2008 was 21 kilometers per hour. Okay. In 2011, it moved to 23 kilometers per hour. So the reasons are, yes, some of the roads that need to be built, clearly, but even it's important to note that it has to be not the quantity, but the quality. So what do we need to link? We need to look at the major traffic densities, density corridors, and those corridors need to be perhaps access controlled, need to have higher throughput of traffic. We need to build ring roads around the cities. We need to have better entry and exit points in cities. So I think there's a lot of misplaced priorities when it comes to the transportation road sector. Rather than just focusing on how many contracts we can award, I think we should look at what are the quality of contracts, how will it lead to benefits in terms of efficiency, productivity.
Talking about the quality as well, if we talk about highway safety on that front as well, Manish, how is the highway safety going to improve?
In that sense, probably there are corridors. It has got a lot to do with the local situation as well. So if you look at highways which are in developed states, which have got reported better social parameters, you see less of a highway safety issue. In states where you see social parameters are not so well justified, you see more of a highway safety issue. So it's got a lot of local jurisprudence impacting it. At the end of the day, I think there will be need to bring in more measures to improve highway safety. Today, probably we are looking at it more from the perspective of providing patrols between point to point. Yeah. Proactive patrolling is something that will have to come in. Okay, assistance booths which are available are whether they are functional, whether the response time is good. So all these questions will need to be answered. But I think the biggest question today is more in terms of availability of the road network, rather than saying I need all the other paraphernalia associated with it.
Rubal, you had a point?
Yeah, I think road safety also, especially with trucking, is also a social issue. The truck driver is generally under a lot of pressure. He's the lowest strata of society. He's the least cared for. He's going through a lot of pressure. He's dealing with traffic and dealing with extremities on the highway. And you and I drive in Delhi or any urban city are already upset and angry by the time we reach home. Imagine this guy driving 20 hours a day, 24 hours a day, because there are no regulations. Cost is an extreme pressure for customers, so it's just being driven down. And I think that is all adding up to some serious road safety issues.
All right, Rubal, thank you. But gentlemen, now final thoughts, what is the way ahead for the Indian transport sector in terms of scope of improvement, and what are your expectations from the government?
I think there's a laundry list of expectations from the government, but I think it's just, the right kind of prioritization to the sector. Clearly, we are not even declared as an industry state. We don't have an industry status. Okay. So I think that's primarily. Secondly, I think there's a huge amount of coordination that is required between the various ministries that exist today. You have the Ministry of Surface Transport, Ministry of Railways, Ministry of Shipping, Ministry of Civil Aviation, Ministry of Commerce, Ministry of Finance. All of these need to be talking in sync when we're talking about the logistics sector. So a few years ago, there was a proposal for a logistics ombudsman. I think that has not happened yet. So I think something like that are some of the basic things required for the growth of the sector.
At the industry level, I think, as I mentioned, the mantra is going to be integration, infrastructure, best practices, governance, as well as to some extent compliance ensured by the recipient of the service.
Okay. All right, Rubal, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we need to empower and give more respect to the truck drivers. 40% of trucks are standing idle right now because there's nobody willing to drive them. It's not a career option anybody wishes for themselves or their kids. And secondly, I think regulatory issues need to be looked at overall as a central government topic, because checkpost issues, halting time, waiting time at various toll points and checkposts and entry points is is a huge wastage of time.
All right, Manish, your thoughts?
I think the only point which I want to add on top of is to make available the right skills to the sector, because the skill development program for our sector is still very nascent. You don't have people who can straddle equally well across transportation and the entire offering of services on the 3PL scale. So skill development is going to be a big challenge.
All right, thank you gentlemen for joining us on the show today, and with that thought, it's time for us to say goodbye on this edition of the Mahindra Transport Excellence Award Series 2012 on ET Now. Thanks for watching and stay tuned to ET Now.